All right, and we are live. Welcome to the left wing. As you can tell, I'm not TJ. He is not here. I am John Cooper, introducing this show with our wonderful guest, Christopher Colt. Chris, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, John. Thanks so much for having me on.
Awesome. So for people who don't know, Christopher Colt is a former journalist whose career spanned nearly 2 decades in radio, print, and television. A lifelong conservative Republican, he became a staunch opponent of Donald Trump following his election in 2016. Today, Chris works in communications while moonlighting as a social media warrior, blogger, and defender of democracy. You may know him as personality of Colt on Threads, which is where I got to know him and connected with him. He's definitely a good follow on there. If you're coming here from my Threads account, definitely give him a follow as well. And Chris, I think we discussed this like the last time we spoke, but I've noticed that people who leave conservatism and the Republican Party, the co-host here, TJ, he's one of them. He used to be an evangelical Christian. We have a lot of people who grew up in conservative households and religious households and end up moving over to the left. And something that I've noticed, this isn't like 100%, but most of the time when someone leaves conservatism, they rarely jump right over the line and, side with the Joe Bidens and Pete Buttigieg's of the world and become moderate Democrats. They just skip the line, go all the way left. And I find that to be very interesting. Is that similar to like kind of how your journey was? Did you just shoot right over, or did it take you a little bit while to get to the universal health cares and all of the more progressive policies?
I'm going to say I'm probably the exception to that rule in the sense that I believe that I have moved probably more slowly than a lot of people because I'm stubborn. It's interesting to think back because I can go back actually, I've been writing just for a hobby for a long time, which gives me an interesting sort of perspective where I can go back and look at some of those writings and I can kind of see the journey and how things were changing. And it's amazing how you can kind of, I think of it in terms of like Trump kind of pushed me out of the party first. I'll tell people I voted for him in 2016. It's the eternal shame that I will live with for the rest of my life. But, at that point in time, I was still at that place where you look at the, people on the left, you hear the things about Hillary and the emails and, Hillary and all. I didn't believe the conspiracies, but I believed enough to kind of get myself to a place where it's like, okay, I can't vote for her. Trump's a Republican. He's kind of a dipshit, but maybe, just maybe the job will moderate him somewhat. And maybe he won't be as bad as he seems. Maybe this is all just for publicity. So that was kind of the thing that I told myself to get myself to the place where I could vote for him. I did so reluctantly. I watched with some trepidation on election night. I was working at a television station in Portland at the time. And I remember like the emotion in the newsroom, people watching what was happening and being like, how is this possible? And I'm sitting there kind of going, cool, but at the same time, I had this, like, I remember vividly having this feeling in the pit of my stomach, like, this doesn't feel like a victory, the guy I voted for won, but, I just remember having that feeling of trepidation in my stomach, like, this better work out. And it was probably, it took me probably 6 months to be like, oh, fuck. Like, this is not good. And then obviously with the pandemic and that kind of stuff. So I tend to be of the mindset that conservatism left me. And then in that moment that I found myself homeless, I really started looking at what did I really believe and what really kept me there. And as I started opening myself up to hearing more from people that I had ignored and, moving from the Steven Crowder type of viewership on YouTube to more of a Sam Cedar or, opening myself up to these voices. And one of the most influential people, oddly enough, was the H Bomber Guy YouTube channel and his, climate denial, a measured response. And when he went through what Crowder was, he shows this chart that Crowder's showing, and he walks you through the argument about Crowder's trying to say that this ice cap is growing. And then you pull out and you look at that was just a moment where when you looked at the data in sum total, you could see the device that was being used, the rhetorical device, the framework that Crowder was using to get to the place his listeners wanted him to be, rather than the place where the truth resided. And that was a watershed moment for me, seeing what was happening with Trump, seeing the way in which the Republican Party was falling into lockstep with his, at that time, I don't want to say fascism, but his autocratic light tendencies. The way they didn't push back at so many things that, in my mind, as a longtime conservative, he ballooned the deficit. He did all these things that you wouldn't consider conservative traditionally if you came from sort of the Reagan school of conservatism. And so it was a bit of a gradual thing. But then once you realize how much you're being gaslit and lied to, you start to look into the underlying principles of the right, and especially increasingly the divorce from reality. And I didn't want to go there. And so it was really more just not wanting to go where the conservatives were headed, where the Republican Party was headed. And that opened me up to begin hearing other voices. And then when you start to see the rot at the base of it, and you realize, like, wait a minute, like universal healthcare might be somewhat socialistic, but it also improves the lives of people and reduces costs over time. And you start to be a little more pragmatic and a little less dogmatic about your views on things. And that kind of led me to where I am now. And I think a lot of that is that journalism background where, you talk to people, you meet people that you otherwise wouldn't interact with, you get to know people. I would interview these Democratic politicians that I grew up believing hated America and loved socialism and communism and all of these things. And you start to talk to them and you're like, no, they're decent Americans who love this country and who want the best for it. And it's just like when you open yourself up to life and to other people and different points of view, suddenly you realize that you've been growing up in a very, very small bubble.
No, it's interesting you brought up how the conservatism has kind of even left the Republican Party. Like the Republican Party of the Reagan days, if you were to look at that compared to now, it's insane. Like, honestly, like genuinely honestly, if you're like a small government conservative, the Democratic Party is now your home. Like, and it's not even a question, given the policies that Donald Trump is championing and implementing. The ICE raids and crackdown immigration from the federal government, occupying U.S. cities, takeover of D.C., of L.A., sending federal troops, ballooning the deficit, skyrocketing it, just trying to control the economy via tariffs. All of these things are massive, massive government overreach from the perspective of a small government conservative. And honestly, Colt, it blows my mind that we don't see more people jettisoning because of that. And it kind of is, I think, what you're talking about with the brand. It's so hard to be like, okay, well, these people who I thought are evil and bad and terrible my entire life, I'm going to jump over to them. Even if I disagree with what Trump is doing, it's hard to jump over to them. And that is something that we're going to get to later in this episode, where we talk about, hey, what is next for the Democratic Party? Because the old Democratic Party is dead. There are a lot of people, I think, like you, who would jump ship, who don't like these policies, even if they're fine with Trump as a person. I think that there are a lot of conservatives who are looking at this and going, well, this isn't really what I've wanted my whole life. And there is a home for them in the Democratic Party. We'll get to how we can get them. But yeah, no, it's always interesting to hear from people who were previously conservative and how they got here, because I feel like there is a lot of opportunity to do outreach, especially in moments like this. Before we get to our segments, just want to get to a couple comments. Kyle and Francisco, they both say hi. So, hey, guys. And TJ, he is watching from the sky. TJ, Power's Not Taken, is the regular co-host. He's not here because he is in the sky right now, and he would love to be here. We'll make sure that next time you're on, Chris, we have TJ here. But want to get to our first segment here, and honestly, it's been a lot of the same in the past couple months in terms of what is going on, in terms of what is leading the news. It's been a lot of ICE raids, a lot of tariffs, a lot of Trump. This is the first time I have seen a Democrat take the national media attention by the balls and drag it with them. Gavin Newsom has always been a popular Democrat. He's always been, penciled in for the 2028 presidential race, but he has really taken the lead of the party by storm and gone after Trump in a satirical imitation campaign. And for those who are unaware of what he's been doing, he's been on Twitter just absolutely lampooning Donald Trump, right? So he has been, everyone knows how Trump tweets, how he talks, and Gavin Newsom is basically just copying that. This was a tweet from earlier today. TJ actually texted, it was actually yesterday, last night, but he texted me over this. And this is exactly how Trump tweets, right? This is coming from Governor Newsom press office official Twitter account. Wow, Fox News can't stop talking about me. Gavin C. Newsom, America's favorite governor. Tonight, their entire primetime lineup was about me. Jesse Waters kept calling me daddy. Very weird. Not interested, but thank you. Sean Hannity, very nice guy, clearly cried because I won't take his advice. Sorry, Sean. Then they dragged out the B team of dum-dums. Meatball Ron, Tommy Toilet Lauren, and Teddy Cancun Cruz. He even flew back special from Mexico. All whining about me, GCN. They had to play the music to shut Ted up about my beautiful hair. I get it. So jealous. Total disaster. MAGA hates me because they hate you. They hate that California is the fourth biggest economy in the world. They hate that crime is down, that we're number one in farming. I love farmers, manufacturing, tourism, and tech, all while we give affordable health care, free school meals, make America pregnant again, paid baby leave for moms. They should not return anyways, $20 minimum wage, and so much more for the people. They hate the Democrats are winning. Fox and MAGA have Newsom derangement syndrome. They should cry harder. Sad. GCN. And there's plenty more like this. I'm going to pop up a couple as we talk about it here. But Cole, what has been your take on this persona that Governor Newsom's putting on?
I think I said it recently. I said I don't know if he's the man for the future, but I know he's the person for the present, and that's good enough for me. Like we can't be, I've said this before. Like it's fine we love to speculate, we love to debate who the candidates for 2028 might be. Certainly Newsom is going to be on that list of maybe the top 5 candidates along with Harris and Buttigieg and a few others. But like the thing that I love about it is that it has reached the right. And what is so hard about the way that our current media infrastructure is set up is you and I know that it's almost impossible to break through into the right wing blogosphere. And as much as we might have criticized Newsom for platforming folks like Charlie Kirk and people like that on his podcast, like I think it did at least open up an avenue for them to hear him. And then I think this continues that, where whether whatever the reaction is by people on the right, if they're upset about it, if they just think it's funny, if they just think it's stupid, whatever, they're talking about it. And that was the thing that Trump did that has been so successful, is that he's like a constant car crash that the media simply can't avoid talking about. Like there would be no Donald Trump president today if the media had simply said, this is a sideshow and a circus, it's not worth our time, ignore him. The best way to have dealt with him early on would have been to ignore him. But since we didn't do that and we're stuck with him, the next best thing is to mock him. And I think Newsom is exactly spot on with this. What I'm curious to see is how they're going to be able to continue this for a while, because this seems to be the thing that, like we saw this during the campaign when Tim Walz came out with the weird thing, and that blew up, and everybody was talking about how weird they were. But then it sort of disappeared, and they kind of backed away from it. And I don't know if that was, a conscious decision, or if that's just the nature of the way that we consume media now, where things have a shelf life, and we can be interested in something for a certain amount of time and then we get bored with it. So I'll be curious to see how you can continue it on, and whether you can continue to keep the attention with this way of going about things. But it certainly has been effective in getting the right to, I think, hear a little bit of what the left has been saying, and maybe hopefully see a little bit reflected back at them when it comes to what they are supporting and what they're lending their credibility to. I think it's exactly the right move for the moment. I'm just curious, where can we keep this momentum up,
No, it's very funny because I was workshopping a thumbnail for this, and I was trying to figure out how to fit Gavin Newsom is both the hero we need right now, as a good thing, and the hero we deserve as a pejorative.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way that I get that in the thumbnail.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, we shouldn't be in this place. We shouldn't be in a place where somebody on the left is forced to do this. This is certainly not where I wanted us to be, but I think it's where we need to go. I said it the other day, we have to fight dirty and live clean, meaning we have to be able to get down in the trenches, to respond in kind, to show them, basically look, here's the crap that you're doing, bad dog, and shove their face in it a little bit. I think that's where we're at right now. I'm not calling Republicans dogs, but I'm saying at some point you have to be able to really get them to focus on, this is what you are supporting. Like I said recently, the difference, and I think that what's driving the right crazy, is they know that Gavin Newsom is pretending to be this way. Donald Trump is this way. Gavin Newsom can stop being that way anytime he wants. Donald Trump cannot, because that's just what he is. And to them, that reeks of authenticity. To me, that illustrates that Donald Trump is a moron. And if you think Gavin Newsom is being a moron by acting like him, guess what you're saying about your president?
So first of all, I want to say thank you for, you said they're dogs, and you're like, no, I'm not saying Republicans are dogs. I'm glad that you did that, because we know that's not true. If they were dogs, Kristi Noem would have gone on a mass shooting spree in the White House by now. But so it's funny, exactly what you're talking, exactly what you just said. I'm going to play this clip of JD Vance, and it plays right into it. So I'm just going to add this here.
Don't help them too much. Stop sounding like crazy people. That really is all it is. I mean, this idea that Gavin Newsom is somehow going to mimic Donald Trump's style, I think that ignores the fundamental genius of President Trump's political success, which is that he's authentic. He just is who he is. You've got to be yourself. You've actually got to talk to people honestly about the issues. I don't think it's that complicated. Don't be a crazy person. Be authentic. If the Democrats did that, they'd do a hell of a lot better. But stop.
It's exactly. Go ahead.
No, I'm just, time and time again, you get your breath gets taken away a little bit by just the constant drumbeat of be authentic, be yourself. And then Kamala Harris goes on TV and is authentically herself, and they're like, oh, but that laugh. Mm-hmm. It's okay, you don't really want authenticity. You just want to be able to bash people over the head and never be called out for it, right?
Yeah, and I'm gonna play the clip from Hannity too, because they're very similar. So real quick here.
I have a point. Results matter. A new performative, confrontational style. Maybe it wins you points with the loony radical base in your party, but America is not going to vote for that record.
It's so funny. And Gavin Newsom, he reposted both of those, saying he almost got it that time. Like they are feeding right into it. And that's why this works on so many levels. Because you're right. I don't even think this is like fighting dirty. I don't think this is dirty. It's not like respectability politics. It lacks decorum. I've never given a fuck about decorum. I've always said decorum needed to go out the window long before we had Trump, because it's just a way of manipulating people. Like politicians should talk like normal people. It makes a lot more sense. And in today's day and age, the attention economy is all that fucking matters. It is the only thing that matters. Basically, for anything in business and politics and whatever you want to say, the people who step up and capture attention are the winners in today's society. And they're talking about authenticity, but here's the thing: Gavin Newsom is authentically just as much of a sociopath as Donald Trump. Like he right. authentically loves doing this and loves capturing the attention as much as Donald Trump. And that's why this is working. If Kamala Harris tried to do this, it would not fucking work. Like if Kamala Harris tried to do this, it would come off incredibly inauthentic and it just wouldn't work. Not everyone can do this. Gavin Newsom is also a psychopath. It's part of his fucking brand. And that's why this sort of thing works. And every time the Republicans, they come at him like J.D. Vance, well, you can't just pretend to be a crazy person. You have to authentically be a crazy person, like the great Donald Trump. Like they just tie themselves in knots. And I don't know. So here's the thing. From where I'm sitting and where you're sitting and where other people with media literacy are sitting, the satire is so obvious, and so effective. Like it is such clever satire. We were talking about this on that last week's show when we were talking about South Park, that this is just incredibly coherent. It is airtight. There's no holes in the satire. It is obvious what they're doing. I also saw like other posts. He posted him, Gavin Newsom, with the fucking giant thing on his ear, the way Donald Trump had from the assassination attempt, and people were like, "How dare he make someone died?" And it's like, bro, this is what Donald Trump, like every attack on Gavin,
like Newsom, Donald Trump's own followers were wearing those things at the RNC.
Exactly. Now here's my question to you. Like we all get that. It is such a clear. It is impossible to beat, but Americans don't have great media literacy. We are not particularly good at understanding satire. And my question is, do you think that this satire is obvious and effective enough to break through to the average everyday voter?
Yeah, I do. I do think that, and here's the thing I've been trying to tell people, and look, the reason, we'll get to talking about redistricting in a moment, but you and I both know that all is happening in Texas, and all that's happening in Ohio, and all that's happening in any other states that are considering redistricting to try and build more seats, is because they fully understand that what they're doing is incredibly unpopular, and that they are in deep shit with the American people right now. Now, Trump can deny it, and I've said this several times. You can lie to people about reality, but reality doesn't lie. And Republicans are dumb, but they're not so dumb that they don't know that. And I think that what they understand is that the average, when you get online and you're in those conversations with the mega folk, right? Meaning that core, that hard, metal core in the middle of the planet of Trump, like those folks are never going to leave him. I mean, we've seen that, right? Like he's in the Epstein files. They know this. They're fine with it, because to them, the highest currency that they can have is that you and I are here talking about them. That's all they care about, that you and I are upset. To them, that's perfect. But that represents like 30% of the right, not 30% of the overall electorate, 30% of the right. And you are not going to hear from those people who voted for Trump in 2016 and in 2020 and in 2024, who aren't eternally online and who aren't part of that core. And they're leaving. They're not going to be vocal about it, but they are. And then the rest of them, I do believe when they see how this, so, as you said, this satire so clearly highlights the idiocy of Trump and the way that he communicates like a petulant toddler who's throwing a fit 24/7, and I think that wears on people. And my hope is that those people that you're not going to hear from are going to show up. I don't even know, honestly, when we talk about this redistricting, I'm not even convinced that Texas can pull 5 seats. People are pissed right now. And from the few elections that we've seen, special elections and stuff, you're seeing like 20 to 30 point swings away from Trump compared to 2024 in some of those races. Like, that's existential numbers. Those are numbers that I'm not even sure redistricting can get around, because a handful of those districts are pretty purple in Texas. And you take the previous elections and you take the swings that we're seeing, they're going to have to manipulate the hell out of those if that's what they're doing to win. I don't even think they're going to be able to do it. And that, I think, Trump is his own worst communicator. But it doesn't hurt to have somebody out there on the other side illustrating absurdity by being absurd, as Rush Limbaugh would often say. I think that we need some of that. Sometimes you just have to see it, And now, so there's going to be certain people. There's going to be certain people that'll be galvanized by this. We know that. Like, there's always the human psychology. I call it the Oobleck effect. The harder you slap somebody, the more likely they are to kind of resist it. But I do think that, like I said, it's opening a door that's exposing people on the right to things that they previously probably weren't aware of. And I think that's helpful.
Yeah, no, so it's not even, I don't even know if they're like unaware. I think like part of it genuinely is Trump was the only game in town doing it. Like even among Republican politicians, none of them tweeted like that. None of them spoke like that. None of them were as abrasive and going out there and just speaking in that way. Even like J.D. Vance, he has that terminally online speak that he goes to, but he isn't that absurd. Like you said, it is an absurd way that Donald Trump speaks, especially when he, posts, and it's become a thing of his that is very recognizable. That if Gavin Newsom's doing it becomes less cool. Like it's just like, oh, this thing Trump's been doing, hey, Gavin Newsom's doing it the same way. Now it's like when your dad starts, saying slang, and you're like, well, I gotta fucking stop saying that word now. And it's like it becomes less cool because the bad guys are doing it, right? So I wanted to pull up 2 things here. TJ Powers taken, not given. He said Donald Trump should try mimicking Gavin Newsom by being tall, in shape, and good looking. And yeah, he should try that, TJ. I don't know how well it's going to go for him. But if you go by his official height and weight in his medical records, that he is tall and in shape. He's basically an NFL player. And he also says, I disagree with Chris. If 3 times Trump voters haven't abandoned him by now, literally nothing will cause them to. They will be Trump supporters until the heat death of the universe. So I agree with TJ there. I don't think that this sort of tactic is going to shift 3-time Trump voters. They're not going to suddenly see this shit and go, I'm not voting for Trump again. I do think, however, it's going to get people off the couch that were just previously disillusioned with the Democratic Party. The people that Chris spoke about earlier that were kind of like himself, where it's like, I've never liked Trump. I voted for him because I hate the Democrats. If you just give people something to like about the Democrats, they'll suddenly be like, oh shit, well, you get stability. And again, when the fucking reality hits, the economy doesn't do well, which we're also going to get to. People can't find jobs. All of this shit is hurting them. And that stink is off the Democratic Party. It's no longer something they fucking hate. They look at it and they're like, hey, this doesn't seem that different from a vibes check level as the fucking Republicans are now. and at least I had a job when the Democrats were in office. That's where you can start peeling people off. The hardcore MAGA Republicans, that 33% of the Republican base that Donald Trump has always had fucking cult captured, they're not going anywhere. But that 33% of like the Rogan Trump voters, the Mitch McConnell wing of the Republican Party, that they just fucking hate the Democrats, but they don't really like where the party has gone under Trump, but they haven't gone over yet. It's the combination of those two things. You need both. Did you say this on Thursday? I don't know if it was you. It might have been you, but you need both Donald Trump to fail and Democrats to be likable again. You need both of those things to get the swings that we need. And Trump, this is, we're going to get to the economic problems that we're facing later in the show, but this is likable. This is capturing the attention economy. This is, people are liking what they're seeing with what Gavin Newsom is doing here. Would you agree with that analysis, Colt?
Yeah, I think so. And I would say I don't necessarily disagree with TJ. What I was saying was that those people that you're encountering online, the hardcore, nothing's going to reach them, because for them, the entire benefit of supporting Trump is our tears. So of course they're not going to leave him. I think, though, that you just need to be able to peel off a few people here and there. Like, the margins were not that big in 2024. We had more people sitting out, and again, this is going to come up when we talk about what Democrats need to do to be able to get popular again. My take on that, in part, was my criticism of Harris's campaign, and it's the same. It was the same criticism of Biden's campaign, and it's the same criticism of everyone who's ever run against Trump, is that they fall into this pattern of reacting to what he's doing. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. What? When all you really needed to do was come out and say, that's bullshit. I'm not going to address that. Here's what I'm going to tell you, what I'm going to do for you. Like, forget all of that. That's nonsense. It's not worth our time. Let me focus on how I can improve your life and how we can make it better. And I think that if they can do that, but I mean, we're kind of past that now. Now we're talking about, we need to just fully just make them look stupid. They're going to do a lot of that themselves. But like, that would have been, I think, the better way to respond is you look at the idiocy that this person engages in. And as a candidate, you look at the American people in the eye and you say, that's not worth your time. That's a distraction. Ignore it. I'm not going to address it. Here's what we're going to talk about. How do we make your life better? How do we as Democrats improve your life, improve the economy, make sure you have a good paying job, affordable health care, affordable child care, paid family medical leave, portable health care that doesn't disappear when your job does. How do we make your life better? That's the populist message that needs to come out of the Democratic Party. We can get more into that later. But I think that would have peeled off more of those people instead of cozying up to, Republicans who are never Trumpers, which just turned off a bunch of Democrats. We need to be able to be populist from our own side and sell what we have to offer the American people. Somebody made a great point today where they talked about, and I've said this before, when you tell people why we need taxes and the Republicans come back with, oh, but you're going to chase away businesses, you're going to chase away the rich. Well, your response to that is there's more to business than tax shelters, right? You can take that money and you can invest in infrastructure, high-speed internet, clean water, rail, all the things that businesses need, a well-educated population. And you sell that. You say, no, they'll not leave if we tax them more, because we're going to be using that money to improve and benefit them in other ways so that they can't go anywhere else, because we have the best educated populace, we have the best internet, we have the best infrastructure, we have the best roads, the best bridges, the best airports. That's what you need to sell. And we just haven't been doing that. We've been reacting. We've been playing parent to Trump's toddler Instead of saying, ignore the toddler whining in the corner, he's not going to do anything for you. He doesn't even know you exist. Here's what I'm going to do. Got to stop focusing on the bull breaking all the china in the corner and tell the American people, ignore the toddler. Let's talk about what we can do to make your life better.
Totally agree with that. By the way, I always say to that, like, you know, the rich are going to leave if you tax them. Why are all the blue states where all the fucking big businesses are? Why do they make the most money? You know, just it's a very, very simple way to combat that. But I want to get one last question to you on Gavin Newsom before we leave this topic. So Gavin Newsom, I know that you are not necessarily a long-time member of the left and the left-wing internet and all of that. He's not very well liked among leftists and progressives.
I am aware
for a
of that,
variety of reasons. You're aware of that. He's kind of a popular. He honestly is like the left-wing version of Donald Trump. He's going to mostly do what benefits himself, but he's not quite as senile and crazy. And I think there's like good and bad to that. Certainly, as you said, he's a useful tool right now. But as someone who isn't as dyed in the wool, kind of raised to hate someone like Gavin Newsom, because like that's just like a lot of left-wing people will knee jerk. I will not praise Gavin Newsom for what he's doing right now because he's the bad guy. And I'm like, he is the bad guy to me still, but like what he's doing is correct. It's a good thing and we should acknowledge that. Where do you see Gavin Newsom? Like personally, does he appeal to someone like yourself as a potential leader of the Democratic Party? Or is there a part of you that's worried, oh shit, if he's the one stepping up and taking the reins, I don't really like that outcome? Obviously, it's better than Democrats losing, but like, is that something that you would be comfortable with? Or are you like, I really hope that this guy's just a stepping stone to get us to where I really want to be?
Yeah, you know, I could see the stepping stone argument, and that's probably where I would default to. But when I think about it more, I go, how many stepping stones do we need? Right? You know, like Biden was supposed to be the bridge to the future. And then he decided he was going to run again, which, look, I didn't support that, but I also didn't support him stepping out of the race because if the Republicans can rally around a senile old fool, then so could we. You know, like I think that it weakened Harris in the way that it went down, and that was unfortunate. And again, it's just one of these examples of Democrats sort of, you know, cannibalizing their own because we have very high standards, and that's great. We should have high standards, you know, but at some point, like, you have to understand that there's pragmatism. And obviously, if it's Gavin Newsom on the ballot against J.D. Vance or, God forbid, Donald Trump a third time, I'm going to vote for Gavin Newsom, right? You know, like I'm going to have to swallow my opinion on a few things because I know he's going to be pragmatic and he's not going to give you all the progressive things that you feel like you need. You know, I've always, like, as much as I respect and admire Barack Obama, I've also been very critical of the fact that the Affordable Care Act was a half measure. And they did it with this idea that Hillary was going to win, and then they could go into 2016 and then shore it up and fix it and make it better. And then Trump got in, and they spent the next 4 years trying to repeal it. And then all of a sudden, we just never really got, you know, Biden did some improvements and expanded access in some ways, and then Trump reversed that, you know. But I've always said, like, there needed to be much more of a hammer to get younger people to sign up, and we didn't do that, and it ended up raising costs, and it knocked people off their insurance, and it did a lot of damage to Democrats because they allowed themselves to be talked into taking away some of the incentive to sign up, right? You know, they allowed Republicans to kind of undermine the ability to get it off on the right foot because Republicans thought if they did that, it would kill it, and then they could just get rid of it. You know, and now it's embedded, but it's still not what it needs to be. And so, you know, I think those are the kinds of things where, like, we've spent so many years, and this is the frustration that a lot of people have with the Democrat Party, is this idea that they're always selling themselves as a better alternative to the Republicans, but not as like the ultimate solution to what can make America actually great. You know, like, how can we improve your life to the point that you know that you can go to the hospital and get treated when you have a condition, you know? And I just feel like Newsom sort of represents, again, kind of this tepid, lukewarm progressivism. You know, he's great. He's populist. He speaks well. I think that he would be infinitely better than what we currently have. But he's not my ideal. You know, in fact, I would probably say most of the leading candidates aren't necessarily my progressive ideal. But at the same time, like, we've shot ourselves in the foot so often by letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, and now here we are. So what do you do? Like, do you look at it from a pragmatic standpoint and go, let's take the person that can get the most votes, that won't be fascist and won't send the National Guard and the Marines into U.S. cities, that won't persecute people because of the color of their skin, that won't go after universities because they refuse to kowtow to your particular ideology. You know, like, there is a point currently in which the alternative to Trump may be the best thing we can get. My concern is that Trump's going to push the Overton window so far to the right that we're going to end up with somebody like Reagan, and we're going to think that that's a Democrat. You know, like, that's what I'm concerned about. Is what I've seen so often from the left is they seem to be trying to hew to the middle to claim those disaffected Trump voters, instead of saying, wait a minute, maybe people, and I think we're kind of diving into the Democratic factions conversation on accident, but like, we need to be, I just think that we've got to be more aggressive at selling what we can offer, instead of telling people what will stop. It's, you know, it worked for the right because they're fact diverse and they're all about feelings. It hasn't worked for the left primarily because most people on the left, I think, are a little more plugged in and a little more interested in nuance and fact and context, and that scuttles things a little bit. You know, but we've got to kind of get beyond that. So I think that the ultimate take is, if Newsom's the candidate, I'm going to vote for him. He's not my first choice, but I think he's doing a great job right now. He deserves credit for that. I'm going to be really curious to see how other people kind of iterate off of this, because, you know, there's conversations happening in all kinds of places about, do we emulate this, or do we just let this kind of breathe and do its own thing? And, you know, I'm curious what the evolution of this is going to be.
Yeah, well, we have to see how this plays out, because I don't think, like, emulate this is the right answer, but I think find other versions of this that continue to work is, because, as I said, if Kamala Harris tried to do this, it wouldn't work. If Elizabeth Warren tried to do this, it wouldn't work. If Joe Biden tried to do this, it wouldn't work. You know, like those types of people, they can't do this, but Gavin can. You know, and you have to find what other things you can do to win the attention economy in a way that pulls that spotlight from Donald Trump. But
well,
before we get to
a parent of three young kids, I know well that you can, like, try all you want to explain to them why certain behaviors are not acceptable. But sometimes you just have to be like, this is what you sound like right now, and just give it back to them. Like, when they're whining, when they're crying, you just look at them and go, this is what you sound like right now. And sometimes it stops them and they go, oh, I have recorded my kids and played it back to them. And so, this is what you look like. And you'd be surprised how effective it is. Far more effective than me saying to them, what you're doing is wrong, and here's why. If I just show them how they're behaving, they'll just be like, ugh. And it's been amazingly effective sometimes to just turn the mirror around and be like, this is what you look like to the world right now. You know? And I think that's what really Newsom is doing.
Yeah, because honestly, you saying that tilted my "is this going to work" to sway people's meter a little bit more, because I have had that. I don't have kids myself, but I have done that when I get in intense arguments with, like, certain people in my life. I'm like, let's record this and let's watch it back, and it does work to kind of even facilitate better conversation in that moment, because they know, like, the panopticon, they're being looked at, they're being watched. It reflects back to them, and they become self-aware of what they're doing, and it does tend to have that effect. So I am interested to see how this continues to play out from that perspective. But before we get,
I think that we have
about Democratic factions and everything. Go ahead, finish up.
Well, I'll just wrap up and say, I think at some point you kind of have to be able to stop being the adult in the room. Not that you let your principles go, not that you become divorced from truth or fact or nuance or context or all of that. But I think sometimes you have to be able to say, okay, this is the turf that you want to play on. Let's do that. And then if you don't want to play on this turf, ask yourself why that is. Like I made the point earlier, so those who have the facts pound the facts. If you don't have the facts, you pound the table, right? The louder somebody gets, the more evidence that is to me that their argument is weak. And if they're responding with anger and vitriol, it tells you that they don't know how to defend Trump on this. And I think that's effective. It's useful. It's not universally effective. You will have pockets of people who galvanize and get more entrenched with Trump over this. But I think the most of the people that you're hearing speaking out are people who have a financial incentive to remain in bed with Trump. And I tend to dismiss people who have a financial incentive. I don't get paid you're not paying me to be on this podcast. I don't get paid for what I do on Threads. I have a handful of subscribers on Substack. I make like $20 a month, It's like, I don't get paid for this. I'm doing this because I think it's important. I'm doing this because I think people need to hear this. I'm doing this because I think my perspective as somebody who has been a Trump supporter in the past, has been a conservative, and is now vocally opposed to him. I think there's use in that. I tend to toss out most of what I hear from people who are being paid to defend Trump.
Yep. No, totally agree. Now, so we just talked about Gavin Newsom. And Gavin Newsom, he started doing this and capturing the spotlight in that way. But the first thing he did wasn't coming out and mocking Trump. The first thing Gavin Newsom did is ignite the redistricting war. And when I say that, he wasn't the first mover. That was Texas. That was Greg Abbott. But he's the one who picked up the battle on the other side. And for those who are unaware, when we're talking about redistricting, it's gerrymandering. It's something that Democrats and Republicans, let's be clear, have gerrymandered forever. It's not necessarily something that's unique to one party versus the other. They have both done it. But especially in recent times, it has very much been a unilateral battle, where the Republicans are like, I don't give a shit. We are going to do whatever we can to hold on to as much power as humanly possible, while the Democrats are like, hey, guys, we should stop doing this thing. This is dumb, and we're not going to fight back in the same way. And it has led to a country where you can have someone, you can have a Congress that is majority Republican, but doesn't represent the majority of people. And if you're unaware of what gerrymandering is, it's, let's say you have a 50-mile square radius where you have 50% Democrats and 50% Republicans, and you have to divide it into 4 sections. You would think the natural way to do that, it would basically create 2 Republican districts and 2 Democrat districts. But you can draw the maps in ways that put all the Democrats in 1 district and the Republicans in 3 districts, so that now you have a 3-1 instead of a 2-2. And that's what these redistricting initiatives are doing. And what Texas did, and what they successfully accomplished today, is they redistricted Texas in order to gain about 5 seats in Congress. And when we say that, we mean, if you go by previous electoral maps and what the population in these areas voted by, you are going to now have 5 additional seats. If you just replayed 2024, you would have 5 additional seats in the House for coming from Texas. And the first thing, as soon as that was like a thing that was going to happen, Gavin Newsom stepped on. He's like, I'm going to redistrict California if you do that, and gain those seats back for the Democrats. Now, this has been divisive among Democrats because you've had people who have been saying, hey, we shouldn't be doing this. This is bad. This is undemocratic, something that I conceptually agree with. And then you have people who say, shit, if they're going to do it and we don't do it, we're just making the problem even worse by not balancing out the scale. And so my question first to you is, where do you side on that? Where do you land on this? Are you someone who's like, hey, we need to fight fire with fire? Or are you someone who's a Kantian ethicist and say, if something's bad once, it's always bad?
I think 2 years ago, Christopher Colt would have probably been more on the latter side of that. But, you know, this second Trump term has been worse in almost every measure than even I imagined it would be. They've been moving more quickly. You know, and as I said before, like, this is evidence that they understand the unpopularity of what they're doing. And I think once you take that into account, once you realize that this is a power play intended to shore up a power base, simply based on the fact that they understand that the American people hate what they're doing, and they're trying to gerrymander the maps in order to remain in power, regardless of the fact that the American people hate what they're doing. And I think once you put it in that perspective, you've got to fight fire in this case, fire with fire in this case, because you have no other alternative. They are doing a naked power grab, about as naked as it could possibly be. They're not even shy about it anymore. They're not trying to couch it. They literally used a deadly flash flood as an excuse to call a special session and then introduce an unprecedented mid-century redistricting. They used the death of children as an excuse to introduce this during a special session. And then they tried to use those children as a shield to accuse Democrats of trying to avoid their responsibility of funding the repairs in this special session. And when you take that all in sum total and you just look at the heinousness of that and the inhumanity of that and the nakedness of that craven power grab, I look at that and go, fuck it. I don't care. I don't care about the rules. I don't care about, you know, all this like ethical stuff. We can't allow that to happen, because if we do, then they're going to move to Ohio. They're going to move to, you know, Missouri. They're going to, you know, they're going to go to all Florida. They're going to go to all these other states. They're going to do the exact same thing because no one was able to stop them now. And all of a sudden, you've literally got the chance that they might get enough members of Congress to then hold a constitutional convention and literally just rewrite the Constitution to favor Donald Trump, who is already probably going to be able to get 2 more conservative Supreme Court justices who are young into the Supreme Court in the next 4 years. Like, we can't lose Congress. We can't lose the Senate, you know, because we've already lost the Supreme Court. We've already lost the White House. And you can see what this Republican majority is allowing already. So, I mean, that's kind of where I fall on it. Like, in the past, yeah, I probably would have been more like, I hate gerrymandering. I hate this redistricting thing. But you have to fight fire with right now. Fire with fire right now, because it's our democracy. It's our future on the line. It's our freedom on the line. You got to fight for that. If you don't, you know, you got to fight like hell, or you're not going to have a country anymore. That's the one thing I agree with Trump on.
Yeah, no, it's the people who, I even see like Nina Turner. I don't know if you know who Nina Turner is, but like she's like against what Gavin Newsom is doing here. I'm just like, if you don't do this, the end result is more gerrymandering to the right. Like if you do not balance that out with your own gerrymandering, because you can negate it, you know. And I have always thought that geographic representation makes no fucking sense to me. I don't know if you agree with this, but like, I don't understand why we have people in the federal government that are supposed to represent a specific area of the country. It's never made sense to me at all whatsoever, because you would want ideally the people in the federal government to be making decisions first and foremost for the good of the country overall. And if they're making decisions for the good of their fucking district that hurt the country overall, I don't understand how that benefits the greater good. Now, I'm never going to win that battle. That battle is basically we need to write a new constitution or to win it. But it does go to, like, if you do that, if you have just proportional representation, you get rid of gerrymandering entirely. You know, like you get rid of, you know, instead of having, hey, these states, if you just everyone in California votes. You have however many districts. I don't know off the top of my head. Let's say there's a fucking 100 districts in California. There isn't, but the top 100 fucking vote getters, down that they're your fucking representatives, and that makes so much more sense to me because it can't be gerrymandered. It is actual, just like proportional representation to the population, and the only drawback is you don't get that local, you know, that regional representation. But again, I don't even think that's a good thing in the first place, and I haven't really heard a good argument as to why it is, because once again, land doesn't fucking vote. You know, region, like America's should be about the good of all, not the good of the people in your fucking local community. Because I really don't understand, if all men are created equal, why do people who live next to me matter more? Doesn't make any fucking sense to me. But one thing that I do want to point out here is that as much as we must fight back, this is a war that we are not positioned to win. And that's something I don't hear a lot of people on the left talk about, but we really don't have that much firepower outside of California. So essentially, California can negate Texas. Texas was likely to get 5 seats out of this. And California is probably going to get 5 to 6 seats out of this. It's a little bit shakier on the math, but that's probably where they get. So they either negate Texas or, you know, D+1. Unfortunately, after California, there's really not much there's not many other states that Democrats have control over that they can do this to. Maryland, you might be able to get 1 seat. Other than that, it's pretty shaky. Whereas Republicans, they have control of Ohio, where they can redistrict up to 2 or 3 seats. Indiana, where they can redistrict 1 seat. Missouri, where they can redistrict 1 seat. Florida, 1 to 2. Kansas, 1. Kentucky, 1. North Carolina, maybe 1. We're going to lose this battle if it goes all the way. And I don't think necessarily it goes all the way in every single situation. But, you know, we could be looking at a 4 to 8 seat deficit if everything goes through. I don't really know what to do about that, Chris. But it is just a very unfortunate position where you got to fight back. But God, if they fight all the way, we're in even more trouble. However, kind of what you said earlier, just because that's what the maps were in 2020 and 2024 or whatever, doesn't mean that's what the maps are going to be in 2026, doesn't mean what the maps are going to be in 2028. And especially in 2026, when Trump isn't on the ballot, we have consistently seen Republicans fail miserably whenever he isn't on the ballot in this Trump era. And so plus 5 seats might be plus 3 seats. So that's the kind of good and bad of this. But have you looked at, like, you know, what I just said? Because I feel like no one's talking about how this is not a winning battle for us to fight.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that you brought that up. I haven't had a chance to get granular in the numbers. It would be interesting to go through some of these seats and look at prior elections and try to kind of game out, you know, let's say if we take the races that we've had so far, we'll have a few more this year that we can look at to kind of measure where things are shifting compared to where they were in 2024. You know, I think that when you look at those and you look at those districts, like I said, I'm not fully convinced that Texas can actually get. I'd be surprised if it didn't get 5, but there's a chance, right? You know, like some of those districts are not super deep red. Like the way they had to redraw the maps, a couple of them are a little pink or maybe even slightly purple. And you get a big enough shift, they might only pick up 3 seats, you know? So it's hard to say precisely how successful, especially since I think most voters, even voters on the right, are against redistricting. Most of them are against this idea of gerrymandering and pushing things. Now, you're going to get enough people on the right who are like, you know, hell yeah, we just need to fight and claw and do whatever we got to do. But I think you're gonna turn some people off. But you're right. I mean, you know, like I think Washington, theoretically could pick up maybe 2 seats. I've heard Oregon has looked at it. They could maybe pick up a seat. But the problem is, like, I think in Washington, you need something like a 2/3 majority in both chambers in order to pass that. And then that makes a referendum that the voters have to approve. It requires 60%. So, like, you're looking at a pretty high threshold in my state to be able to do that for a pickup of 1 or 2 seats, maybe. So I think that's a lot of the problem. Is a lot of these Democratic states have enacted legislation that makes it harder to gerrymander. Great. The Republican states didn't follow suit. And so we've created the position now where we've created this disadvantage that makes it harder for us to respond, because, like in Texas, the legislature just comes and goes, we're doing this. At least California is giving it to the voters and saying, are you okay with this? There's a democratic process there, as there would be in most Democratic states. But it puts us at a disadvantage. It puts us at a disadvantage largely because Democrats like to play by the rules. I like to play by the rules. I think everybody should play by the rules. And if you don't play by the rules, now you're risking becoming just like the people. I always say, don't set your compass by your enemy, or you'll wind up just as lost as they. Like, we have to be careful about that. So I want us to fight fire with fire, but I also want us to be mindful of the fact that if we push too, I think Republicans aren't doing themselves a favor with this in the minds of voters, and I wonder how much that might impact things. So I'm not as fatalistic about this, I think, as some people are, just because I've seen the numbers and the way they're shifting. But you're right. I mean, it'll be interesting once these maps are done to kind of be able to get in there and play with some numbers and figure out if things shift the way they have in other races since 2024, what that might look like. So I'm not giving up on the idea of reclaiming the House. We have to, we have to.
Yeah.
There's no, like, whatever we do, we have to, like, people can't sit this one out. That's the main message that needs to get that out there. Like, you don't have a choice. Go vote.
Yeah.
No, if you want to make this a moot point, go vote. Yeah.
No, so it's fun because you said that you like to play by the rules sort of thing, and I always say I get what you're saying. No, this is not necessarily I'm coming at you for saying that, but it is something that has always rubbed me the wrong way when people say that, because what that literally means is not what you're trying to say, because it's an unwritten rule you're talking about. Mm-hmm. It's like when people, the unwritten rules of baseball or whatever, the decorum, like I said earlier, these aren't actual rules. These are unwritten rules that we made up. If we're going by the rules of the game that we're playing, this is totally legal and within the rule set. It is completely and utterly fair game to do. And I've always I've told
break the law,
Exactly.
And I've said their law.
Like when people are like, I don't know, a bad sportsmanship in a game, I'm just like, well, if it helps me win, go fuck yourself. What's the point of this? I remember my middle school football team. I played nose guard. I'm a little guy. It'd be shocking that I played nose guard, but I played nose guard, and we lost our first game. We'd been undefeated like my entire football career. It was the first game I ever was about to lose, and they're about to kneel the ball. And I'm lined up, and as soon as they snap the ball, I dive through and try and steal the ball in between the middle of the snap. And they basically started a scrum, and my coaches got mad at me, and they're like, you can't do that. And I was like, why? And they said, because you can't. And I'm like, is there a rule that says I can't do that? And they're like, no. And I was like, I should play through the whistle, right? I should play every snap as if it matters, right? And they're like, yeah, but it's just not what you do. And they told me, you'll eventually understand this. Still don't fucking understand it. Still don't. To this day, I stand by that. If it's within the rules, and again, that's a fucking game. That's a game that doesn't fucking matter. This is the most high stakes game in existence. This is thousands, if not millions, of human lives are being fought for here. If you're not willing to do absolutely everything that are within the rules of the game in order to win, you're gambling with people's lives for the sake of your own morals and what you think the rules should be. And it's always rubbed me the wrong way when people talk like that, because I'm like, what's more important to you? Getting the fucking fascists out of office, or your ethical hangups with redistricting? Like, it weigh the two together and be honest with me.
Well, and I think, like we said, it's important to note that Texas didn't break the law. You know, it's unethical, but it's not illegal what they did. In California, even more so, is attempting to temporarily change the law in order to allow them to respond. So neither of these states are going against the rules. In one case, they're sort of asking people if it's okay if they change the rules temporarily, you know. And I think it's important that remain our perspective, that you can, I always say, if you don't like the rules, change the rules. Like, if you're the Trump administration and you don't like the way that ICE is required to operate, if you don't like the fact that people have due process, go change it. Get the number of votes that you need to change that law. Because otherwise, if you can't get that number of votes, if you can't change that law, then the odds are either the law shouldn't be changed or people don't want it to be changed, you know. But otherwise, fine, fair is fair. Fight within the rules, you know. And if you have to skirt the rules or change the rules in order to win and make sure that we can retain our freedom to vote, our freedom to love who we want to love and marry who we want to marry and be who we want to be, then if that's what matters, that's fight for that. You know, that's just where I am right now. You know, and I'd say this is like traditionally I'm a rule follower, right? You know, like, I like the rules. I think the rules are there for a reason. You know, what it's the Chesterton's fence, the rule that says, you know, understand why something exists before you want to take it down. And, you know, this thing that I keep coming back to with the Trump administration, they're taking things down that they don't understand. They're breaking things because they don't understand them. They've literally created this ethos that, like, if I can't understand that in a single page, then it's worthless. And so they tear down the fence, you know, and now here come the barbarians, which is what we're doing to ourselves, because they're so dumb that they genuinely don't know what they're doing and what levers they're pulling. Or, I mean, maybe some people do, and maybe it's intentional. I'm loath to give intentionality sometimes to a lot of things. I think people are more creatures of instinct than malevolence. There are certainly malevolent players, but I don't think that they have as much control as you think. I think people tend to follow pleasure and profit. And those are the motives that lead us to where we are, you know. But that having been said, like, yeah, we got to fight, and we got to fight dirty. But we can't lose our soul, and we can't lose our conscience, and we can't lose our affinity for truth and justice and what's right. And I think if we can keep those as our North Star, you'll also win people over, because I do think that people value that. You know, I think it's important. You know, you can't necessarily be, you know, Kamala Harris wanted to be the adult in the room, and I love that. That's valuable to me. That's an asset for me as a voter, but clearly not for millions of my fellow Americans. And so at some point we need to say, these are the candidates I like, but these are the candidates that can win.
Yeah, at the end of the day, what matters to me is the things that you fucking do, the policies that you pass, the laws that you pass, the things that you implement. Are they going to improve people's lives?
Yeah.
I don't give a shit how much of an asshole, how much of a dickhead, how much of a whatever you are. As long as you do the things that improve people's lives, you can call my mother a whore, and I'm still gonna fucking vote for you. It's not the tactics that are bad; it's the outcomes that are bad. Do whatever fucking tactics you need to win. Just go fucking win, because we can't have these guys winning. And I agree with you, by the way, about the
I completely agree. Like, our LGBTQ brothers and sisters are at risk. You know, there's a lot of people right now whose ability to be who they want to be, whose ability to live authentically as themselves is in serious risk. And we need to understand, like, I'm not at risk. I'm a middle-aged, straight, white dude. You know, I could put my head down. I could just power through the next several years and no one would say boo to me. Right? You know, but I'm out here because it's not about just me. It's not about just my survival. It's about the country. It's about the people in the country. And it's about making sure that the least of these are valued and cared for, and, you know, and that we don't give ourselves over to this mind of that my neighbor is my enemy. You know, I don't know if you saw that, what's the guy's name? Andrew Tate, that letter to the editor that was going around. And I've read that probably 10 times now. I just love it. I love every bit of what he said, because he's absolutely right. We need to ask ourselves the most important question. Who is this government for? Who do they serve? I don't see them, you know, like, all the gold filigree covering everything in the Oval Office doesn't serve me. A 90,000 square foot ballroom connected to the White House doesn't serve me. You know, who is being served by paving over the rose garden at the White House and putting a patio there? Does that serve me? Like, we need to seriously ask ourselves that question. People need to really just man up and look at what this guy is doing and ask yourself. I probably 5 Trump supporting people in my life that I still talk to. And I've asked each and every one of them, every month since Trump became president, can you name me one thing that has materially improved about your life that you can directly point to a policy he has implemented and thank for it? Every month since he got into office again, not once has one of them been able to respond with something. We're 7 months in, John. Like, you should be able at this point, if you're a Trump supporter, to say, my groceries have gone down, my gas is cheaper, my heating bill is less expensive, the illegal immigrant who raped my mother was deported, whatever. You know, like, you should be able to point to something by now that he's done, because he made a lot of promises about in 24 hours he was going to bring down the cost of groceries and they were going to drill, baby, drill. He said within what? I have to go back and look. He said within 18 months he could have heating bills and gas half what they were. Well, they're only
going to end the war in Ukraine on day one.
Out of time. Yes. You know, it's like, at some point you have to be able to kind of pull back. You know, I had a conversation, like probably an 8-hour conversation with a Trump supporting friend recently. And it was so frustrating, you know, because like so many times he'd look at me with this sort of blank expression, just shrug. And I'd be like, what did you just do right there? What did you just, like, why did you just shrug? You don't have an answer? That doesn't bother you? Do you lack curiosity at all? Like, do you not want to know what documents he took when he left the first time and why he was trying to hide them? That doesn't bother you? Do you not want to know about the hush money payment to Stormy Daniels? Do you not want to know about the rape of E. Jean Carroll? Do you not want to know about his tax fraud in New York? Do you not want, you know, like, does none of this concern you? I've been sending so many people, you know, he's improved he's $3.2 billion richer today than he was when he took office. $3.2 billion, most of that through a worthless crypto meme coin that exists solely as a way for people to launder money to him. And I sent that to my dad and I said, I want you to just read the story and just replace Donald Trump's name with Joe Biden and then tell me your reaction. Crickets. You know, it's like, at some point, you've got to be able to step back and look at things holistically and stop siloing everything and stop translating for him. You know, like I was asking my friend about tariffs and he went on this long spiel and I looked at him at the end of it and I said, you just gave me a 10 times more cogent breakdown of tariffs and how they work than the man you voted for has been able to do. Why is that? And it's just like, oh, it's like you were able to articulate a way in which tariffs might work. Now, that's not what they're doing, but you at least laid out a case. Far better than the person you voted for and still support. That ought to stand for something. And it's just this, I just think he's got good instincts. I just think he's onto something. I said, for how long? How long do I give you in order for us to start seeing these things? Nothing. You know,
here's
like, and
here's the thing, Chris.
Through those too.
Yeah, it's not like you say, are you not curious? Do you not want to know? And the answer is unambiguously yes. They don't want to know.
They don't want to know.
And I say this often. And again, as much as I enjoy disparaging Trump supporters, what I'm about to say isn't even specifically disparaging of only Trump supporters. We all do this, where we have certain assumptions about life, about the world, that are pillars in our mind. And they hold a lot of things. And if you take that pillar away, so much weight comes crumbling down upon you that you will defend that pillar against to unreasonable degrees. And again, like, we all do this. Maybe we have a family member or a parent or a sibling who's a bad fucking person, just a bad person, and you just refuse to believe it. Because if my dad is a bad person, all of these things, all these lessons that I taught that are good, that have defined me as a person, it's being supported by that, you know. And a lot of people have that, regardless of political spectrum. We have it a lot. Like look at Democrats, like Biden, for example. He wasn't with it. Yeah, I think we can all agree that he shouldn't have been fucking president, and it probably was dangerous in some regards. And a lot of Democrats still to this day won't admit that. Like, they will sit there and tell you square to your face, Joe Biden was as sharp as a tack. There was no age deterioration of his mind, just totally fine, because it's holding up so much of their belief system, and they can't do it, you know. And so many people do that. And when you have that, it's impervious to facts and it's impervious to new information, and that's how fascism takes hold. They put more and more and more weight on these pillars. They start with little things. They start with, hey, these immigrants are coming over and, you know, raping and murdering, and it's like, oh, I can believe that, I can say that. And then suddenly they're eating the cats and dogs. Suddenly they're responsible for all the crime in America. Suddenly they're doing all this. Oh, we have to send the fucking masked federal agents into workplaces, into churches, into schools to kidnap them and take them away. And like, once you, okay, I'm on board with that. Oh fuck. If I admit that I was wrong about any of this, shit, that makes me look like a Nazi. And they can't fucking do that. And so
so you'll choose to be a Nazi rather than look like a Nazi.
Exactly. No, that is so entirely the case, because genuinely, this is, again, not just a Republican, not just a Democrat or anything. We would rather look like good people to other people than be good people. Again, not everyone is like that, but across the board in humanity, that is a defining principle. And like, again, you see that just in basic fucking tests where, you know, you go into, I'm sure people have heard about this, like psychological tests people have run, where you set up a room and you have one person go into it. Everyone else is a test subject. You ring a bell, everyone stands up. And eventually that test subject just follows along with the fucking crowd. And they get replaced until everyone is a test subject. Ring the bell, everyone's standing up. And it's because we just have this psychological need to be seen as part of the group by the people around us, even if it's totally absurd and we have no understanding as to why people are standing up when they ring that fucking bell. And that applies to so many things in life. It applies to so many things in politics. And it very much explains why your dad, when he sees that article, it bounces off of him, because if he were to admit the truth of that to himself, so much weight would come crumbling down on his head.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the other day, I can't remember how it came up, but I sent him some, so as a Christian, right now, he's being very much like, well, you know, what really matters is your personal salvation, and don't be so, you know, you don't need to be so concerned about politics and all that. And so I pulled up, because, you know, we have a chat, I can search the history. So I went back to 2022 and found a post where he was talking about, like, I was asking him whether he supported pastors preaching politics from the pulpit. And his response was, "Oh, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't you want to speak out against the evil in the Biden administration?" And I showed that to him. And I said, "This was you 2.5 years ago. Did your mind change? Because now you're telling me, oh, we don't need to be so interested in politics. Just, you know, follow Jesus and God's in control." Like, he was in control back then too, right? Nothing. You know, it's just like all of a sudden just disappears. And I told him, you know, I don't want to get into the weeds on my dad. That's a whole thing. But, like, you know, I just said, all I've ever asked of I have never asked any of my Republican friends or family to follow me to the Democrat side. I've never asked them to become a liberal. I've only ever asked that they apply the same skeptical lens that they do for every other politician to Donald Trump. That they not allow him to get away with things that they wouldn't allow somebody else to do. And every single one of them will tell you, oh, that's fair. And then you show them something and they go, well, but Biden, and I'm like, you don't have a defense. But Biden is not a defense. It's an excuse. It's a deflection. It's an effort to avoid taking responsibility for what your guy did. If I grant you everything, if I grant you that Joe Biden was as corrupt as they come, I'd be okay with that. Like, if it was true and you could prove it, fine, lock him up. I don't care. Because I'm not beholden. I mean, what am I going to do with all my Biden merch? You know, like, no. Like I don't have the flag, I don't have the decals, I don't have the hat, the coat, the shirt, whatever, the mug. I don't have any of that stuff because I don't worship politicians, because that's stupid. Because putting men on pedestals or women on pedestals never works out. They're always going to let you down. Even the best politician, the person you love the most, even a Jasmine Crockett or a AOC or a Pete Buttigieg or whatever, are at some point going to say something that you don't like. At some point, they're going to let you down on some topic, because we never see 100% eye to eye with anybody, you know. But I can take those things and I can say, yeah, I don't like that, but it's better than this, or it's a step in the right direction, right? Like I said earlier, I don't like these bridge things. I think we need to be more, we need to embrace progressivism and just own it, and just say, with our full chest, as confident as we can, say, this is the way, right? The way we're trying to go back to a way that we've already tried and it didn't work. Stop that. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing twice and expecting different results, right? Done with that. But at the same time, like, I look at that pragmatically and go, you know, I need to be able to apply that skeptical lens, you know. And so let's say I grant you everything Biden did was terrible and evil and he's the most corrupt president in history. Fine. What does that say about your guy? What does that have to do with your guy? They're two separate human beings living two separate lives. What Biden allegedly did has nothing to do with what Trump is currently doing. So stop it. Stop that. It's not productive, you know? It's like you just want to pick them up and live. It is. It's like, I was telling my wife the other day, it's very much like a puzzle that I just can't solve. I think that's what fascinates me so much. It's always this thing of, like, I hear you saying this, and then I see you supporting this, and those things don't line up, and I don't understand that. Explain it to me. I'm too old to, I don't want to do politics anymore. I'm too busy. Like, I'm busy too, but it's the future of our democracy at stake. So maybe bone up and man up and have the conversation, because it's important. But they always want to run
it's
away.
fun. To circle that back to the beginning of the episode, like that's one of the reasons I feel like conservatives, when they stop being conservatives, often go way farther left and go, because we also fucking hate Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. We are not fans of them. Like when they're like, but what about Biden? We're like, yeah, fuck him too, bro.
Yeah.
Come over here.
Biden was
Come to the populist left. We don't like them very much either. We criticize them all the time. If you, everything you're saying about them, I mean, not everything, but a lot of the things we'll agree with you on. Let's make it better. And that's
great
why,
things. I think, and he deserves plenty of credit for the good things that he did.
Yeah.
You know, like take what Chris Pratt said the other day. Like, Chris Pratt's an idiot, but you know, there is something in that is a kernel of truth, and that is that we should never allow ourselves to come to a point where we hate somebody so much that we can't even acknowledge when they've done something good. But what he missed in that was, like, that's exactly what the right does with Biden. Like, the Infrastructure Act was a good thing. The CHIPS Act was a good thing. The Inflation Reduction Act, mostly a good thing. Like, there are a lot of good things that Joe Biden accomplished through those largely bipartisan bills. Like, he's an old-fashioned politician. He worked across the aisle, and he gave some and he got some, and that's how it used to get done. He was able to get stuff done in a very divided Washington, D.C., and he deserves some credit for that. What Chris Pratt is entirely missing, though, is that the right will never, ever, they would rather cut off their own genitalia, like fully just go eunuch, than ever give Joe Biden credit for anything. And then they have the temerity to come out and say, well, don't get to where you hate somebody so much like Trump that you can never admit when he's done something good. I tell you what, when he does something good, I'll give him credit for it. Now, he could make that easier by doing something good. Let's start there. Do something good and then test us. Yeah, but it's just like this. But, you know, I say all that to say there is a kernel of truth there, that we should never become so hateful of somebody that if they do something good, we can't give them some credit for it. You know, like during his first term, Trump did a couple of things that I actually liked. He was able to bring down the cost of some prescription drugs, you know, in a rather bass-backwards, ineffective way, but he got some of that done. The vaccine for COVID, he deserves a lot of credit for that, which he has now completely done away with, you know, but he deserves some credit for that. Fine, I'll give it to him. If he can get a deal done that allows Ukraine to be at peace and keeps, fine, do it. I'm happy to admit that if you can solve that war, great. I don't necessarily hate the fact that he's at least trying to get people in the same room. Like, that's a good thing, right? People should be talking. But then you have to add on to that the whole, you know, Putin's puppet thing, and the fact that he keeps parroting Russian talking points. Like, again, you know, I wrote something about this on my Substack recently about all the things that NEGA says they want to do that I actually agree with, but then all the ways they fuck it up.
Yeah.
Because what they say isn't what they actually do.
Yeah, there are two undeniably good things that Donald Trump did that if you can't admit this, you're just being partisan. One, as you said, Operation Warp Speed, it's what we fucking needed. We got it on time. We got it as fast as we possibly could. And you can argue that he wasn't incredibly involved in that. I don't give a shit. He didn't fuck it up. He got that done.
He got out of the way and let him do it.
Exactly. And the second thing is he gave all the assholes a shiny red hat so we can identify them more easily. That was probably the best thing that he ever did. But anyway, so we're going to shoot past the economics discussion because we did a lot. We often do this. We often end up having one thing that we tail off. We'll have plenty of opportunities for episodes where we dive into the looming economic recession that we're coming into. But maybe we'll have you back on, Chris, for that. But definitely wanted to talk a little bit about the DNC, the factions within it, and what is going on right now. And I think it's clear at this point that the Democratic Party is dying. It is over. What we understood the Democratic Party to be, it's kaput. It has its lowest approval ratings it's ever had. Reports just came out in the New York Times how we're getting our asses kicked since 2020 in terms of registering new voters. Millions more voters have registered for the Republican Party since 2020 than the Democratic Party. That's not to say the policies aren't popular. Democratic policies consistently poll higher than Republican policies. It's the Democratic Party brand as a result of Democratic Party leadership and what they've put out there and what people understand them to be that is utterly toxic. It is unsustainable. It is going to die. And also part of that is that the big leaders of the party are all old now and are literally going to die, and just new people, Father Time is undefeated. They're going to step up, take their place. Time will go on. And what I want to talk about today is what the current factions of the Democratic Party are and who we think are going to be the winners of all of this. So this is not necessarily scientific, but I've broken up the party into 6 different coalitions. And some of these members, they're going to straddle the lines. This isn't like hard lines here, but I broke them up into 6 coalitions. Those coalitions are the left wing. That's your Bernie, the squad. Bernie, AOC, Tlaib, Omar, Zorhan Mamdani is a new entry that has, gained a lot of attention. That would be definitely in this. This is your left wing, your progressives who are very much, at least in some way, explicitly anti-capitalist, whether they are official DSA members or whatnot. That's your spot. You then also have what I will call your technocratic progressives, your Elizabeth Warrens, your Kamala Harris's even is pretty damn relatively progressive, your Pete Buttigieg's, your Ro Khanna's, people who don't go all the way to the Bernie side of the party, but very much agree with them on a lot of fucking issues. Then you have your, what I will call your abundance coalition, your Gavin Newsoms, your Richie Torres's, your Ezra Klein's. Definitely progressive on some issues, definitely relatively conservative on others, but kind of are trying to push the party forward in certain ways. And specifically with that one, it's a lot of housing market deregulation, also some of the technocratic stuff, but not getting quite as progressive as the Warren wing. We then have the purple wall is what I call them. Your white people in purple states, specifically your Josh Shapiro's, Gretchen Whitmer's, Andy Bashir's. These people are definitely, everyone agrees they're up and coming in the Democratic Party, but they haven't actually made a huge name for themselves yet, except for being the governor of these purple states, which, could shoot them into major prominence in the near future when the old guard dies out. The old guard being your Bidens, your Pelosi's, your Schumer's, your Obamas, your Clintons, those being the people who have shepherded the Democratic Party for the last 20 years. And then I will say your last faction is the new establishment, which is your Bookers and your Jeffries, the people who are basically saying, I'm going to be just like the old guard, but younger. That is how I have divided the groups here. Would you say that's a pretty good division of the different factions within the DNC right now? Do you think there's anything I'm missing or anyone I misplaced?
No, I think I pretty much would probably uphold all of that. I think that, as I said before, what I'm really curious to see, because I think there's really those two ends are what's pulling, right? You have, I think the Harris side was this mindset of like, okay, let's try and get some of those disaffected Republicans. Let's get those center right Republicans and kind of maybe see if we can pull them over. It didn't work. I mean, clearly. I think it did work in pulling some of those disaffected Republicans over. But what it had the ancillary effect of doing was discouraging younger, deeply progressive voters who looked at the message and said, well, what's going to change, right? Like, what's different from how things have been? You know, Biden's just kind of dipped his toes in some of the areas that he promised, you know, but he's still cozy with big oil and he's cozy with big pharma and he, you know, like, you know, so I wouldn't argue with your categorization. And I think that you're right that what's going to happen is over the ensuing months, you're going to see a real battle between those people. Where I land, and even though I wouldn't call myself, I'm probably not as progressive as you. I wouldn't call myself deep left, you know, but I am of the opinion that that's what you have to campaign on. I really do think that the Democratic Party, the one thing they need to adopt from the right is just shameless self-promotion, utterly shameless self-promotion, and basically just come out and say, hey, they're fucking you over. We're going to fix it. And here's how we're going to fix it. We're going to make sure that the rich pay their share. We're going to make sure that you have health care when you need it. We're going to make sure that you have a living wage job. We're going to raise the minimum wage. We're going to make, you know, whatever it is, like you can go down the whole list. But I really do think that's my preference, is that everybody needs to just say, hey, this is how we're different. It's your life. And really get away from the being the parent in the room and reacting to the silliness of the Republicans. Like, let it speak for itself. Most people are not eternally online. Most people are not like heavily committed to one particular political ideology or another. Like, there are a lot of people who are very committed to a political party, but then if you sit down with them and you actually pick apart what parts of the party platform they support, you find that almost everybody is a weird shade of gray, you know, like none of us are completely one way or the other. You know, some people are progressive, but really want a strong border. Some people are progressive, but, you know, don't necessarily believe in universal health care as a, you know, something that we can do. Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that the Republicans have done and done really well, whether it's true or false, is they sell themselves every second. You know, Trump will lie to your face, but he'll tell you the lie you want to hear. So tell him the truth they want to hear and say, no, he doesn't care about you. I mean, look what he's done. Like, just look at what he's done. You know, the top 10% are getting an extra $15,000 plus because of this big, beautiful bill. If you're in the bottom 10%, you're losing money. And that's before we count the possible loss of benefits like Medicaid, and, you know, like, just so I really hope that all of these sides, all of these factions are able to come together and say, these are the things that are, you know, we've got to come together and we've got to be able to say, these are our non-negotiables. You know, these are the things that we're going to offer. We're going to offer tax relief for the middle class, tax increases for the upper classes. You know, you've got to have a populist message. You've got to be able to come in and say, it's time that we stop allowing people to become so wealthy that they can use their wealth to prevent other people from accessing the same success. That's not fair, you know, and it really needs to be about fairness at this point, because that's what people are upset about. Like that editorial, who is it for? Tell them who it's for. Tell them who runs the government. Tell them who has the power. It's not Donald Trump. It's not the Republicans, you know. And I agree with you. The Democratic Party's dead, but the Republican Party is too. Whatever comes out of this will not be traditional left-right politics. It's going to be an anarchist, quasi-fascistic, oligarchical ruling class against a populist left wing.
Yeah.
You know, And right
Well,
now, the right understands that they're unpopular, and they're trying to use what power they have at the moment to ensure that the left can never get back into power. You know, I've said this multiple times on threads. Whatever you think of the right, whatever you believe about what Republic, you need at least two strong political parties in a country in order for it to be healthy. You have to have that push and pull. And it should terrify everyone that Republicans are currently engaged in a zero-sum game in which they are just openly saying, we want to eradicate liberal ideology in this country. We want it dead. Now, they'll never be able to do that, but the very fact that that is their goal, that that's their stated ambition, should terrify everyone. What they really should be saying is, this is what we have to offer, and this is why it's better than what the left wants to do. But you don't hear that anymore. You know, it's just, we're going to do this. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine.
Yeah, and that's like a couple of things there. One, the fact that Republicans don't actually, like, Trump doesn't stand for anything. He stands against things. I think it's one of the big reasons he lost in 2020. I think that the voter turnout was a result of the pandemic, and people just paying more attention as a result of the pandemic definitely affected that. But I think the other thing is he works this ethos, this ideology that he represents. It works at fighting things. It works at saying those guys, they're to blame for your problems. But it's way easier to do that when you're sitting on the sidelines. It's way harder to do that when you're sitting in the Oval Office. And that's why, like, I was just like, when, you know, it was Biden, it was just like, and when Kamala decided to just stay in the lane of Biden, I think Kamala's way more progressive than she gets credit for because of the campaign. I would not put her in the establishment. So I would put her more closer to like the Elizabeth Warren wing of the party, but she decided to go, I wouldn't change anything Biden did. And I think that's what sunk her, because that's exactly the type of candidate that Donald Trump can win against. The type of candidate he can't win against is what you said, the populist, the one who's like, fuck all these people and these people, the rich, blame them for our problems. Who's the fucking richest guy? The guy who's decorating the Oval Office in gold fucking plating. That fucking guy. You know, the guy that aligns himself with Elon Musk. You know, that is the winning message. It's why I say this all the fucking time. It's why Rogan endorsed Bernie in fucking 2020, because that message appeals to so many Americans who, whether or not they hate the fucking Democratic Party because they haven't delivered. They've kind of said this for my entire life. Hey, we are the party of the working class. We are the party that's going to, you know, finally make things right in America. And yet things haven't been made right in America. Things are not good, and everyone sees that. And so when the Democrats go, hey, things are good, we're like, you're a fucking liar. I don't necessarily know whose policy is better or whatnot. I just know you're telling me things are good and they're not. And Donald Trump, he's telling me things are bad, and that's how I feel. And that appeals more to me. And that's why you need these other wings of the party to come in and take the reins, in my opinion. I would say you, Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. I would say you probably align most with the Elizabeth Warren wing of the party.
Yeah.
You're very progressive. You support I like Liz too. You're very progressive. You support a lot of these progressive policies, your universal health cares, you know, your other things, but you wouldn't maybe necessarily go all the way into being anti-capitalist. I wouldn't.
Democratic. You wouldn't put me in like the rent control camp necessarily. Those kinds of things. You know, I find it's interesting. The whole Zoran Mandani thing is really fascinating to me. Not necessarily even in this, like, I don't, you know, people that think that he's going to turn New York into a socialist hellscape, it's like clearly don't understand how city government works, and the fact that a mayor has to actually work with a council to get things done. And, you know, like, you can vote for somebody based on what they promise, but there's also reality, and they have to work within a system to do things. So that doesn't concern me as much. What really fascinates me is the fact that here you have a populist candidate, right? Somebody who's coming out, who's not traditionally what you would expect of the left, and he's kicking ass, despite the fact that there are some things he's put forward that a lot of New Yorkers don't necessarily support, but he's promising things, and he's, I just think it shows that there is a hunger for people who will come out and say, the system is fucked up. It's rigged against you. I'll fix it. Just, give me the power, and I'll try to make it work for you again. And, whether or not they can do that, that's, I think that it's always where the rubber meets the road, right? Politics is politics, and you can promise whatever you want. But at the end of the day, if you get elected, you have to be able to deliver on some of that. That's where we have to be careful to promise things that we can deliver. Just Biden promised a big divorce from big oil, and then we got the most oil and gas pumped in history. So at some point you have to be able to deliver on the promises that you're making. But Zoran, to me, represents, I think, an alarm for both the left, that center left, and the right, because it shows me that at least in progressive cities, people are tired of the pragmatists. They're tired of the realists. We shouldn't be, because real is where we live. But it's interesting, I think, that you see in that a strategy for the rest of the left to say, hey, maybe people are tired of being told what we can't do. Maybe they need to hear what we can. And again, I think that we damage ourselves when we feel like we must respond to every lunatic thing that comes out of Trump's mouth. And I think that we'd be far better off to, again, I appreciate what Gavin Newsom is doing. I think it's useful, do it. But I think elsewhere, we also need to keep this in mind, that there needs to be a level of, and again, what Gavin's doing is not necessarily this. He's calling attention to the style of Trump's communication and the way that, when you hear that from somebody else's mouth that normally is very staid and, circumspect and very erudite and thinks things through, all it has the effect of sort of shocking you into well, this is unusual, But I think in terms of where we go from here, there needs to be a turn to this, hey, give the people what they want, because the people are the power. We forget this. I don't know. I made the I annoyed people a little bit the other day because I threw George Carlin under the bus slightly. I love George Carlin, adore him, and I don't think this is what he intended. But his "it's a big club and you ain't in it" shtick, I think, did damage the feeling that Americans have about their impotence and their lack of power and their lack of ability to affect change. Somebody asked me recently, are you going to run for office? And I said, if I run for office, it'll be my city council, my library board, my school. That's where you can make a difference. And that's what annoys me so much, is that people are so focused on the national perspective, while the Republicans are getting precinct officers and, they're getting people at every level of government who are sycophantic to Trump. Whereas Democrats, by and large, are just focused on the national races or the statewide races. It's no, your school board is where most of the damage is being done right now. Go run for that. Make a difference there, and then see what else you can do. People need to get grassroots. People need to get, I know I need to take my own advice too, but that's where you can make a difference. And that's where people need to be focused over the next few years, is protect your home turf, and it'll spread, right? We got to plant seeds in our backyard in order to get this to spread, in order to get it out there and get people understanding that oh, wow, this person who's progressive got elected in my town, and they actually got those potholes fixed, or they got that stoplight adjusted, or whatever. It doesn't matter, as long as they see somebody that maybe doesn't agree with them politically, but is actually busting their ass for them, all of a sudden they're going to go, wait a minute, I know this guy's a Democrat, but he's looking out for me. We got to do that. We got to be able to like show that we actually care about each other and that we want what's best for other people. Like that's one of the things I appreciated most about Biden is, as much as like, you know, the retribution side of me would have loved to have seen him like kind of, you know, flip off the red states with his infrastructure money or CHIPS Act grants. Like the fact that he was willing to go into those places and invest in them, you know, for all the good that it did. But I think it's important. And I think that they should have done more to really focus on that and say, guess what, red states, you just got $10 million or $10 billion to build a gigafactory in your backyard and make a bunch of jobs. That could have gone to Minnesota. It could have gone to Washington State. It could have gone to Oregon. It could have gone to California. It could have gone to any other blue state. But we put it in Georgia because you need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I find it very interesting you brought up Zohran Mamdani. And specifically then talked about the the importance of running for local office and affecting these things, because I don't know if you saw, have you ever heard of an organization called Run for Something?
Sounds familiar, but I'm not sure if I've been to their site. But
definitely recommend looking them up. They're an organization that their entire goal is to help people run for something, specifically young people, and mostly at these local levels where they can actually win and get involved and make a change. And they said after Zohran Mamdani won the Democratic primary for the New York City mayoral election, they saw thousands and thousands of young people reaching out to them saying, I want to run for something. And I think that's the effect. I think it's funny. I think that where you are in that Elizabeth Warren, spectrum, policy wise, is probably the winning combination of policy, but it doesn't quite matter because no one in that group lights the fucking fire. That's what people need. That's what gets asses in seats. That's what gets feet on the ground. That's what gets wheels to pavement, is that fire that comes from more that Bernie wing of the party, the AOCs, the Bernie Sanders, the Zohran Mamdanis. They're the ones that inspire people. And that's why I think some combination of those two factions is going to win, because the old guard ain't inspiring people, the establishment moderates ain't inspiring people. And as you said previously, there was this idea of we have to be pragmatic, we have to be cautious, and it just doesn't exist anymore. What pragmatism has gotten us here, what's the fucking point? And I think a lot of people are seeing that, and we're like, we just want someone who's going to go out and fight. Gavin Newsom's going out there and fighting right now, and he's getting all the fucking praise for it. And I need more Democrats to go out. Whoever, what my fucking wrestling coach always told me, at a certain point, you're against an equal skilled opponent. It's going to come down to overtime, and who fucking wants it more, that's the person who's going to win. And that's what Democrats need to have in their mind. Whatever fucking faction of the party wants it more, is willing to fight harder, they're going to take it.
Anyway. What I'm really curious to see, I wrote about this on my Substack recently. I think it was the one that Mega's a cult of person, not a cult of personality, it's a cult of persecution. And I made the point at the end that it's pretty easy to win as a persecuted minority. Right. But once you are the majority, it's hard to govern. And I think Trump's going to learn that lesson soon enough, where you can spend all the time you want talking about all the bad that they are doing to you. But this is the second time that you've had the White House, the Senate, and Congress in your control. And now you also have the Supreme Court in your control. And there's a point at which, we might already be fucked in terms of our democracy. Who knows? But I do know that Trump is going to find out pretty soon that you have to actually deliver at some point, or most people will turn against you. Not the base, not the cult members, not the sycophants who need him for their income. But the people, the farmers, the people like that guy who wrote that editorial, those people are going to at some point look at this presidency and be like, why is my grocery bill $200 a month more? Why is my insurance $200 a month more? Why am I paying $100 more for my heating bill? Why does it cost me $50 more to fill up my car? Why does that microwave cost $10,000, whatever, like $100 more than it did 2 weeks ago? Like at some point, the sum total of all those realizations, of all those vibes, of all those feelings, it's gonna hit home with people. And I don't think that you and I, who are like super online, have a concept of the fact that the vast majority of people aren't reading the news, aren't looking at statistics. They just know what their income is and what their outgo is and how much they have left over at the end of the month. That's their economic report. And you can fire the BLS statistician, you can put a sycophant in there, you can get rid of the Fed chair and control that all you want. But at the end of the day, if my balance sheet is appreciably different and my take-home pay is significantly less a year after this guy got into office than it was when he took office after promising to lower all these prices, I'm going to look at that and be like, this ain't fucking working. And all the Democrats really need to do is get their shit together and be ready with a plan to respond to this and come out in 2026 and say, are you better off now than you were when you got into office? And if the answer is no, then maybe we need to try a different course. Maybe the economy was getting better under Biden and it's gotten worse under Trump. And maybe we need to go back to those policies, because every single time a Democrat gets into office, the economy improves. And every time a Republican gets into office lately, we hit a recession or, God forbid, a depression. Like and I could be overly optimistic. I leave space for that where, I'm always a glass half full type of guy. I've been accused of that all my whole life, being overly optimistic. But look, Biden was losing and Harris largely lost on vibes because of what people felt, right? Inflation went up to nearly 8%. People's grocery bills got substantially larger. And even as prices came down, people still looked at their balance sheet and went, I don't have as much money as I used to. This sucks. And that hasn't changed in 8 or 7 months since Trump took office. And it's not going to change, definitely not going to change in the next 5 months. So the question is going to be, when we get into 2026, how are you? And Democrats just need to be ready with the answer to that question and say, did he bring down prices? Did he solve that war in Ukraine? Did he, how's Gaza doing? And I think at some point you just need to be able to come in and say, he has fucking failed at everything he's tried to do. So maybe we don't do that again. Maybe it was a bad idea. And I just think that, you don't win that by beating people over the head with it, but you can certainly ask that question. And I've been asking, like I said, I've been asking the people that'll listen to me, is your life any better yet? He's already, Lutnick has already said, or was it? No, I think it was Hassett. Posted and said, when the economy was doing, when we had that good jobs report recently, he posted and said, this is now Trump's economy. I said, save this one, because it's going to come into play. And sure enough, it has. It's Trump's economy now. And every time it goes down, he's going to try to blame Biden. But every time it goes up, the people in his orbit and himself cannot help themselves but claim credit for when it goes up. And people are not stupid. They can be ignorant. They can be obtuse. But most people are not stupid. At some point, they're going to figure out that you can't always take credit for the good and always blame other people for the bad. It just doesn't hold up. It's not a winning strategy long term. It can get you into office, but there's a reason Trump lost in 2020. There's a reason he won again, which is because people forgot. and we gave him far too much leeway because of the pandemic and what that did. You know, we all sort of developed this collective amnesia about, you know, we just look, oh, before the pandemic, things were pretty good. It must have just been the pandemic that caused the economy to go off the rails. Well, it turns out, if you were paying attention, the economy was already on shaky ground under Trump before the pandemic hit. You know, so now, barring some other major global pandemic or major global emergency, like, people are going to get to see an unvarnished, unfiltered view of what Donald Trump's economy looks like. And so far, the results are bad, like just all the way down bad.
They're not good at all. They're not good at all. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. Yes. Thank you guys for watching. Me and Chris are going to get into it again on a future episode. So make sure you like and subscribe so you know when that is. And if you guys want to hear more of Chris, Chris, how about you tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, you find me at Personality of Cult on Threads. You'll also find me on Substack, and I'm working on the YouTube channel, so I'll post that on Threads as soon as we get it done. But we're gonna do our best to copy John's formula.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys again for being here. TJ will be back with us next week on Tuesday at 6:30 for our Q&A show. Make sure to be there. Until then, have a good day, people.